Hello, this is Drew, and here we're on the fourth or fifth video for Windows Server 2016, and this time we'll talk about the basic config of DHCP, and we'll get that up and running really quickly. So far we've created a domain with 2 DCs and a Windows 7 PC that's waiting for an IP address. It was set up with a static IP before, and the DHCP role has been installed in the previous video on DC1-CAN. In this video we're going to create a scope, set scope options, and then we're going to exclude some addresses and test it out on that Windows 7 PC. After this we'll start talking about DNS. Actually, this is not right. We already installed the role with Active Directory. So we'll talk about DNS, the basics, and lookups and that kind of stuff. So let me just load the VMs here. One sec. Okay, so here's our PC waiting for an IP address, and here is our DHCP server that's not configured yet. So it gives us basically instructions of what to do when we select that node in the console. If we create new scope, and next, and we're going to give it a name. I'm going to organize it by country first. Canada, Victoria. And description, Canada, Victoria office. And in my environment anyways, it'll host IPs for servers and Windows 7 clients, that kind of thing, everything basically, but you don't want to separate that in production. Servers in one subnet, workstations in another, phones in another, that kind of thing. 10.1, 192.168.10.254. So now, if you might be thinking, well, I shouldn't be handing out IPs for, 10.2 because that's my domain controller IP address. That's okay. We'll include the entire scope in there anyways because we can exclude it in the next window. Okay, settings for that propagate length. We want to use that Cedar notation. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's a /24, so we want to include that whole 255 addresses, or 254. Oops. And then subnet mask is that by default, so we only hand out that one range. Here's where we exclude IP addresses. So I don't want to hand out IP addresses to the devices with static IPs, so I exclude them with this list here, 10.9. So that means that our first address that's handed out is .10. Subnet delay. So if you had, I haven't found a practical example for this feature yet, but if you had two DHCP servers and you wanted one to answer before the other, you could say that there's a 1 second delay on this server, and then the other one would most likely respond faster and hand out IPs that way. So I can't think of a good practical example why that's happened, or why you would need that, but that feature is there, so it's good to know. The default's pretty good for normal situations, 8 days. So after 8 days, a client would get a new IP address, or maybe the same one, depending on the situation. I think it's actually half of that. The client would check to see if it can contact the DHCP server and if it can still use that IP. But yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than just this, unfortunately. For my lab, I'm going to say 1 hour because I'll want it to expire soon and show examples of what happens. Scope options, yes, I want to configure scope options. So here's one example. Where's the gateway? So if your clients need to get out to the internet, you would specify your gateway's IP address here, and then all of your DHCP clients would just know that gateway when it learns the IP address. Parent domain lab.local, so this will set up the DNS suffix for your computers. That's more for DNS resolution. And then because Active Directory already knows the 2 IP addresses for the 2 DNS servers, it's added that in for you. You can add in more if you like. Win servers, we're not going to use Wins. That's pretty old and not a lot of systems use that anymore. And yes, I want to activate it. So when I click this, I'm pretty sure our Windows 7 client will get an IP address pretty quickly, if I remember right. Click on Finish. And there we can see our scope, our address pool. Here we can see our address pool for distribution and then our excluded addresses. And here's our address leases. So I was wrong in that this computer isn't trying to get an IP address anymore. I waited too long. So one way we can do it is renew the IP. We can disable the NIC and re-enable it. That'll do it too. Come back here and we can see it's on the lab.local domain and it has the first IP address in our DHCP range. So that's it, you're done. You have a successful DHCP server up and running. And we can confirm that by ipconfig all, and we can see that it is got the primary DNS suffix built in there. What that means is if you were to ping a NetBIOS name like ping dc1-can, it's going to append .lab.local to that DNS request and find the result for that. So we know that DNS is also working that way. Here we can see DHCP is enabled. We can see the subnet mask that DHCP has given us and the IP address when the lease is going to expire. We can see the 2 DNS servers. We can see the DHCP server that gave us the IP and the gateway as well. So that's the basics of that. Now what if ipconfig all? What if we wanted a static IP? So if we pretend that this is a server or some other device, maybe an access point or something, and you wanted this to have a static IP that never changes. So you can do that by writing down this MAC address and then coming over to your reservation list and right click new reservation, give it a name. I'll say, just for pretending, access point 1. And I'm going to give it an IP address, and it can be anything. It can be 99, it can be 6, as long as it's not being used already. So I'll leave it at 6, and now we need the IP address, or sorry, the MAC address, 273815F0, and again another access point. I'll leave that in with spaces and that one without, so you can see what is displayed over here. And then close. So we can see the reservation name is displayed here, and if we select that, we don't see the description again. But if we go up to leases, here we can see the name and the description over there. And we can also see that this reservation is inactive because a client has not tried to request an IP address yet for that reservation to kick in. So I'll show you ipconfig release. So that's going to tell this computer to let go of its IP address, and DHCP will also learn about that. Refresh, and it's going to get rid of the .10. So that .10 address is now available for somebody else to use. ipconfig renew. So now it's asking DHCP, what address can I use? Where's my refresh? Here? Here. Okay, and now it says active. So we know that this reservation is being used by a client, and yeah, and basically it has the exact same information that it had before. So if we do ipconfig all, we can see it's still got the same primary suffix, got the same gateway and everything, except it has the IP address that we've specified in the reservation. So pretty simple. Now, if how are we doing, 10 minutes? I'll try and, I want to show you an example of an issue with DNS where a reverse DNS record is not created. So let me just get that set up, I'll come back. Okay, so I'll explain the situation here. So I won't explain DNS just yet, I'll just explain the issue, and those who know will know, and hopefully this will fix it. So what I've done is I've released the IP address and renewed it, and I've told it to register the DNS address in DNS. But in this new environment, that doesn't work. If we load up the DNS console, we can see the reverse DNS record for 10.6 has not been created. And that is because of, for me anyways, it's kind of a weird scenario where DHCP isn't authorized in security to create that reverse DNS record. Haven't figured out exactly why that is yet, but here's one of the solutions. So in the DNS Update Proxy, we need to create a user account with the least amount of privileges and add it to this DNS Update Proxy user account. It's probably best to use a managed service account so the password changes automatically by itself, but we'll just create just a basic user account for now. And I'll create a new OU called Service User Accounts. And new user service for DHCP. SVC DHCP. And I'll give it a meaningful description here. Click OK. And now under this group for proxy admins, where did it go? We'll add the service user account. Okay. So now if we refresh that, it wouldn't show up. So under DHCP, which is here, so under IPv4, and then properties and advanced. DNS Dynamic Update Registration Credentials. So this is what wasn't working for me before. So what we have to do is type in that service account name, DHCP, for lab, and then the top secret password. If you type the password in wrong, you click OK, it'll give you an error message right away. If it doesn't complain, you typed it in properly. Okay, so now that we have those credentials set up, if we release and renew the IP address for this machine, the reverse DNS record should appear. Refresh. So let's go ahead and disable and re-enable it. Okay, so it's got an IP address. Let's hope that it's working. There we go. So that's one of the examples I wanted to show you if your reverse DNS records aren't being populated properly. What else? Yeah, so that's about it for now anyways. In the next video, we'll jump into talking more about DNS.